Hi, good morning everyone, and no doubt you've seen these really tantalising slides and hopefully you're already intrigued about the book we're going to launch. So welcome to the ETA's launch of Writing Like a Writer. The title is very apt because we have so many different voices, the voices of writers coming through this book, and that makes it an incredibly practical resource. In this book, professional writers and teachers come together to offer you examples of their craft, how they craft, why they write, and how they write. So the voices of these 15 writers share examples of informative, persuasive, imaginative, life writing texts, creative non-fiction, discursive texts, which is a very New South Wales word, but I think has broader resonance also, and remembering of course that this book has been written for the Australian curriculum as well. We have also a section on playing with text, and one of the authors of this section, Will Kostakis, is going to speak in just a minute. So there's a real diversity of textual forms and perspectives within this book, and I'm going to mention some of the writers that we have. You'll no doubt see them on the screen as well, just so that you can see the variety and maybe some of those names you've even heard before. So Will Kostakis, who's here, John Marsden will be familiar to many of you, Michael Boyer, columnist Richard Glover, poets Peter Ram, Troy Wong, Hazel Smith, Ryan O'Neill, who's an academic and has written 99 reinterpretations of The Drover's Wives, which if you haven't read, it's, fall out of your chair funny. And teacher and blogger Darcy Moore also join published teacher writers Kirsty Everett, Mark Raffiti and David Lees, and also Luke Bartolo, who's written something interesting on comics. So we really do have all the modes, all the forms and practical things that you can take into your classroom and use.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Will Kostakis. I'm a young adult author. You might know me from the books The First Third, The Sidekicks, or my latest released We Could Be Something. And it was my absolute pleasure to be a part of this book. Look, what I contributed to it was there was one section on transforming Shakespeare, which was taking one of the Shakespearean sonnets and then reimagining it for a young adult audience today. And then off the back of that, then I wrote another chapter on what is young adult fiction and what defines it and how we go about writing it ourselves. And today, I really wanted to focus on how empowering writing is for writers and for readers. And I thought I would begin by talking a little bit about, the challenges that English teachers face nowadays, especially as, the offerings of fiction to add to our reading lists have diversified so much over the years. There is the challenge where we have to come up with reading lists and text lists that are everything to everybody. And I understand the weight of that can be really immense. The solution to that is creative writing. And the reason why I say that is, look, my experience as a young, closeted, sort of gay kid in the back of my Year 9 classroom, I encountered absolutely zero gayness in my English classroom. Well, actually, no, there was one text, and it was, we were, that period after like term 3 in Year 9 where you've got 1 week where you can't really start anything, so your teacher just does, let's just do whatever we want. And my teacher loved the Shakespearean sonnets, and we were doing one a day together as a class. And we came to one, and the first one was presented and we thought, okay, this is about a girl. The next one, oh yeah, this one's about a chick. The third one, it was a woman's face. And we read it, it's like, and someone in the class, God love him, he was a bit dim, but he put his hand up and was like, Miss, why is Shakespeare writing about this girl having a woman's face? Is that because she looks old? And my teacher was like, oh no, he's actually talking about a guy. And she just tosses it out there, and it was like, oh, a lot of Shakespeare's sonnets were actually, we believe, written, for men. And she was like, oh, one particular man. And I remember that being like a lightning bolt for me because I was there deeply closeted. This is back in the era where you came out at the end of your career when sales were waning and then people took you off to the farm upstate to just live your gay little life. And it was always a controversy. Think about George Michael, that sort of thing. And I was sitting there going, I really wanted to be a writer, and I wanted to be read, but I also wanted to be loved. And there was that sort of tension in my life where I was like, I'm going to have to choose between one of these things. And, when we talk about the power of reading diverse texts and all that sort of stuff, that was the first time in the classroom where I thought, holy crap, I can have both. Like, still deeply afraid. I didn't write queer characters for another 10 years, right? It was really, really scary. But creative writing still empowered me to fill in gaps in the syllabus, like, considering how not diverse the texts were that I studied. The only Greek texts I encountered, as in a text featuring a Greek Australian or anyone with a yaya or even just a passing reference to moussaka, were the stories that I was writing in class. And that's the really, really wonderful thing about empowering your students to pick up a pen and write. It's that if you don't have the texts on your syllabus, they can write themselves into the classroom. And that brings with it so much power. And my teacher would always tell me, oh, well, your stories always stood out, on the marking deck, because I'd be reading these really, really boring stories about rugby, and then, oh, there's a Greek grandmother and she's being outrageous. And that's something that I've brought with me to my creative writing as an adult. It's something I keep returning to because I understand the power and the authenticity of, sharing my experiences with others and being open and honest. The empowerment is shared. Writing empowers me as a writer. I get to see myself. Teenagers who get to write their lived experience, they get to see themselves. My favourite ever, those in New South Wales, we used to study something called belonging. And so I remember teaching a belonging workshop, and this kid, I'm like, can you tell me about an experience when you felt like you really belonged? And I remember this kid, he puts up his hand. He was one of those kids where you could tell the teacher was like, oh, hell no, do not speak to the visiting author. You be quiet, you're the troublemaker. And I'm like, no, this is the one I want to hear from. And I'm like, yeah, tell me. And he's like, oh, so I've got a story about when I belonged. I'm like, go for it. He's like, so right, we hate this kid called Tim, right? And I'm just like, and you just see the teacher just look like, and I'm like, go on. And it's like, right, well, so he works at Macca's. And so this one night when he was finishing up clothes, what we did was we got all this wet toilet paper. And we ran outside his Macca's and we started TPing his Macca's, me and my mate Sam. And he was inside crying, right? But I looked over at Sam, and as he was throwing the toilet paper, I felt like I really belonged. And I'm like, oh my God, he's written a story about belonging through bullying. This is amazing. No one else in the state is going to write this. And it was the first, and his teacher didn't want him to speak up in class. But that was the first time that he saw himself through the sort of strictness of the English syllabus. And writing allowed him to reflect himself. And that is shared with readers. The wonderful thing about young adults, which I cover in my chapter, is that it centers on empowered characters who have agency. And they are teenagers who are usually their parents are, suspiciously absent in their lives, and they have to step up, whether it is go on a fantasy quest or, solving other problems. But it's not just, gone are the days where we have these passive characters who are looking onto things and wondering, oh, this is really sad. I am just transcribing this all. These are characters who are active in the creation of meaning in their own lives. And that is infectious for a reader, because you are showing teenagers, hey, this is what you can do to be empowered in your life, where, look, we live in an increasingly scary world. And I always encourage English teachers, if there is a book on your reading list that is collecting dust, I am certain that there is a young adult book that covers very similar themes, but conveys those themes in a way that speak to, I'm uncoordinated, that speak to younger readers of today. And so please don't be afraid to explore young adult fiction on your reading lists, either pairing them with an older text. Like I know schools that pair Hunger Games with 1984. And the thing is, you show them the Hunger Games, right? You get them really, really excited about those themes. And then that is the lens through which they then look at 1984. Yep. And that can be through the film or through the book. Yep. So I really recommend, if you're looking for ways to connect with teen readers, please look to young adult. And that is something that I cover in my chapter. But this was a book, look, I've got a bit of writer's block at the moment. So I finished my latest book in March and my brain has just turned to mush. And this was the first time I actually got the hard copy last night and I flicked through it and I came to Michael Gerard Bauer's chapter. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to try one of these exercises. And it was so much fun. I found my enthusiasm coming back as a writer. This is not just something for your students, this is something for us as adults. And if you recapture your enthusiasm for creative writing, it's infectious. And it's not just something that we do in a classroom and never do again, because as humans, we are storytellers. And if our students never put pen to paper after year 12, that's fine. I mean, it's not fine. But it is fine because they have learnt enough about storytelling that when they're telling stories to their friends at restaurants or in bars or on awkward first dates, they are going to know the structure to a good story. And they are going to know how to connect with people, because that is how we connect with people, through stories. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Will. That was just delightful. And you could capture so much of what storytelling is and how it is that we write who we are, and how writing is enormously affirming. It's something that is about passion, it's about love, and these are emotional words that we don't often use about a book that from the outside looks a bit like a textbook. But the book itself is far more than that. It's reflective, it has so many different activities, and the variety in it is just amazing. And it also does, because it's written by writers, have this lovely personal edge. So I now declare this book launched, and would encourage you all to go to the AATE store and pick up a copy. It's also, as you would have seen if you're looking at these slides, the third book in a series. So it's the culmination of these two other wonderful books that also offer a series of ideas about writing and lead up to this book in so many ways. And they're great, they're practical, they're the kind of thing that you can photocopy and take into class. And they also have a wonderful authenticity, because they have the voices of all these writers and all these teachers coming together in this kind of glorious symphony, I guess, of ideas about writing.